Okay, so we should have this point here where we've got the icing. It looks relatively kind of convincing as a donut. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make this a bit bumpy. So the first thing is when we go into rendered view, you can see it looks a bit rubbish. And so we need to sort of change that. We need to make sure that our render engine is cycles. It doesn't look much better. And the reason is because it's not reflecting anything. So we need to create like a reflection. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into this bit, which is the world properties. And at the moment, the background is reflecting, is just this, it's just gray. You can change that in any color you want and it will reflect a different color. But what we want to do is reflect an image. So we're going to go and create an environment texture. So I've given you turned it all pink, don't worry about that. That's normal. It just means it's looking for a texture and it doesn't have one. I've given you one. I put it onto manage back. So I'm going to open that and find out where it is. And it should be called, and my one is in a different place, but it's called Leadenhall Market, and it's basically a picture of a market in London. And now when we spin around, you can see that we are getting a nice kind of 3D view of a place in London, and it's updating it, and it looks a bit weird because it's kind of floating donut. But the great thing is that we're getting all of the reflections from it, because HDRs have the ability to be wrapped and also to kind of show up in reflections. If we don't want to see the background, and in this case we don't, we go to the render properties, down to film, and just turn on transparent. So now we've got this and it's all looking good and it's got a reflection. It takes a while to update, but don't worry, it will look good once it's rendered. Okay, next thing is we need to make this look a little bit more appetizing, because at the moment it's looking a little bit flat. So we need to make it bumpy. So what we're going to do is open a shading screen here, and this is a little bit scary. And this is basically how kind of shaders are made. So I'm just going to zoom out and we can see what we've got here. This is the object. It has a surface. It's connected using this, which is here, the principled BDSF, or BSDF. And then we have the color, which is this image that we created in Photoshop. And that's plugged into the base color. You can plug that in any way you want, but basically the base color is where we want it. Okay, if you're finding that the kind of, when you're zooming in, it's kind of zipping off to the side, just go view, frame selected, and that will center your object into the middle. So what we want to do is you want to make this a bit 3D. I mean, we could texture paint it, but it would take a long time, or we could sculpt it, I mean. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a free kind of texture, because at the moment what we've got is we've got an image texture. Which is making the base color. So what we're going to do is use one of these ones, and we're going to use a noise texture. These are called procedural, and it means that they're just generated by the computer. And this one will create like kind of crazy colors like this. So, which is not really particularly useful for coloring it, but is useful for creating kind of noise. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make this bumpy. So I'm going to add a bump map, and that's contained under vector, and vector is basically going to say that it's going to change the actual geometry. So we're going to use displacement, and we're going to plug the color of this noise into the height, and then the height is going to be plugged into the displacement. So it looks a bit weird and it doesn't look particularly bumpy, and the reason is because it's a displacement map and we need to tell the computer to displace it, because it's a big thing and we need to kind of make sure that it works. So we go into the settings of the surface, this principled BSDF, and we go down to settings and look for bump only, the displacement, and we want displacement and bump. Click it on, not much has changed, but if we go into rendered view, then we can see a lot has changed. It's got turned it into a spiky donut, which is kind of like sort of weirdly cool, but kind of not really what we needed to do. And that's because the scale on this here is way too much. And so even if we made it 0.5, you can still see it's a lot. So these are powerful plugins, and so we need to make it like really small. And even that's too much. But it's starting to kind of get there. So I'm going to go 0, 2. And that's looking about right. It's looking a bit kind of weird in terms of the texture, and that's because the scale of it needs to be bigger. And what that means is that it covers more space. So if you increase it, you can see we're getting more detail on it. And you need to play around with this to get the right kind of look that you want. It's very much kind of up to you in terms of sort of like what kind of scale you want to get to. But I kind of think this is about right. If you keep going, I apologise for the wind outside, I can't help that. It's kind of, that looks about right. I think it's maybe too much bumping, so I'm going to put it down to 0.1. I think mine's too small, so I'm going to bring it down. But it's very much up to you. Have a look at what you think will work. So I think that's about right. And the only thing I want to change now is I want to change the subsurface. I want to bring it up a bit, like to maybe 100 or 0.1, and then make what's inside it kind of like yellow, because it's like, it's basically it's bread, and so it's going to absorb some light, and so we want to make it look like that. And then once we put the icing back on, then it should look good. Okay, and so there we have it. And now we have the donut with the icing and the bump texture.